The stone halls of Stormhold Castle never stayed warm for long. Even now, as summer reached its peak beyond the ancient granite walls, a persistent chill lingered in the royal chambers where Magnus, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, stood alone by his window. At 32, his broad shoulders and battle-hardened frame commanded respect without effort, his presence heavy as the mountain upon which his ancestral home was built. But tonight, that powerful body betrayed him once again. The pain came as it always did, sharp and merciless. Magnus gripped the windowsill, his knuckles white as the agony ripped through him like molten steel in his veins. He ground his teeth to silence the scream that threatened to escape. No one could see him like this. No one could know that their warrior king, conqueror of the Western Pax and unifier of the fractured territories, was brought to his knees each night by an ancient curse that even his alpha strength could not defeat. When the worst had passed, Magnus drew a ragged breath and straightened. 20 years he had endured this curse, 20 years since his 18th birthday, when the pain had awakened with his alpha powers, just as it had for every male heir of his bloodline for over 5 centuries, a reminder of the sin of his ancestor who had betrayed the moon goddess herself. "Your Majesty!" The voice came after 3 precise knocks. Garrett, his most trusted advisor and commander of the Royal Guard, a beta with the loyalty and fierceness of any alpha, and the only man in the kingdom who knew the full extent of Magnus's suffering. "Enter." Garrett's weathered face remained impassive at the sight of his king's pallor. Instead, he simply offered a small vial filled with amber liquid. "The council meeting begins in 30 minutes. Lord Thornwood has arrived with his daughter." Magnus took the vial, downing its contents in one swift motion. The bitter herbal mixture would dull the edge of his pain, not eliminate it, for nothing ever did, but make it manageable enough to maintain his regal facade. "And has Lady Vivian expressed her feelings about our impending engagement?" Magnus asked, his voice steady despite the fire still burning in his bones. "She seems most enthusiastic about becoming your queen." Garrett's slight hesitation told Magnus all he needed to know. Vivian Thornwood was enthusiastic about power, not about him, but alliances were not built on love, and the kingdom needed Thornwood's trade routes and military support against the growing threat from the southern territories. Magnus nodded. "Then let us not keep them waiting." As they walked the long corridors toward the council chamber, Magnus felt the weight of his crown without wearing it. Each step was a reminder of duty over desire. Yet lately, his dreams had been filled with visions of a woman with chestnut hair and eyes that seemed to see through his carefully constructed walls. A woman whose mere presence seemed to quiet the constant agony in his blood. A phantom of his imagination, surely, born of desperation for relief. "The preparations for tonight's banquet are complete," Garrett continued, his voice low enough that passing servants couldn't overhear. "Lord Thornwood expects you to announce the engagement formally." "And the council's opinion?" "Divided, as always. Most see the strategic value, but Elder Thorn mentioned the prophecy again." Magnus suppressed a grimace. The ancient prophecy of the Moon Queen, a fairy tale used to soothe children at night. A promise that one day a queen would rise with the power to break the royal curse and usher in a golden age. His father had wasted years searching for such a woman, only to die in agony like every king before him. "Elder Thorn should concern himself less with myths and more with the southern armies gathering at our borders," Magnus replied sharply. Garrett's face remained neutral, but Magnus could sense his disapproval. His old friend still believed in the old ways, in the prophecies and traditions that Magnus had grown too pragmatic to trust. 20 years of unrelenting pain had burned away his faith in anything but what he could see, touch, and control. The council chamber fell silent as Magnus entered. 12 of the kingdom's most powerful alphas and betas rose from their seats around the massive oak table. At the far end stood Lord Thornwood, an imposing figure with silver-streaked dark hair and cold, calculating eyes. Beside him stood his daughter, Vivian, whose beauty was as undeniable as it was carefully crafted, golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, her crimson gown cut to emphasize her perfect figure, her smile practiced to the point of flawlessness. Your Majesty, Lord Thornwood bowed with precisely the correct depth, enough to show respect without suggesting submission. We are honored by your punctuality. The negotiations that followed were a carefully choreographed dance of power. Thornwood wanted exclusive mining rights in the Northern Territories. Magnus needed military support against the southern threat. Vivian watched with the sharp eyes of a predator assessing potential prey, her gaze lingering on the royal crest that adorned Magnus's formal attire. Not once did she look directly into his eyes, the intimacy of true eye contact being reserved for mates or challengers among wolf shifters. Throughout the meeting, Magnus maintained his imposing presence despite the constant pain simmering beneath his skin. His responses were measured, his decisions swift and final. This was the king they expected, resolute, unflinching, dominant, the alpha of alphas. When the council adjourned, Vivian approached, her movements deliberately graceful. "I look forward to tonight's celebration, Your Majesty," she said, her voice a practiced melody. "I've heard the Grand Hall of Stormhold is without equal in all the territories." "Indeed," Magnus replied, offering the expected courtesies while maintaining the careful distance protocol demanded between an unmated alpha and a high-ranking beta female. "The castle has stood for 8 centuries and has witnessed the rise and fall of many alliances." Her smile faltered slightly at his emphasis on alliances rather than marriages or mates. "Some arrangements are destined to endure, I believe." Before Magnus could respond, a sharp wave of pain lanced through him, more intense than before. He maintained his expression through sheer force of will, but Garrett noticed, stepping smoothly between them. "Lady Vivian, perhaps you would like to see the preparations for tonight's banquet? The royal steward would be honored to escort you." As Vivian was led away, Magnus turned toward his private chambers, Garrett falling into step beside him. Once safely behind closed doors, Magnus released a controlled breath, his jaw tight against the pain. "It's getting worse," Garrett observed quietly. Magnus moved to the window, looking out over the vast forests that surrounded Stormhold. "It always does as the moon waxes. You know this. The full moon is still 2 weeks away. If it's this severe now—" "I can endure it," Magnus cut him off. "I must. The alliance with Thornwood must be secured before the southern packs make their move." Garrett was silent for a moment before speaking again. "I had the dream again last night." Magnus stiffened. For months now, Garrett had reported the same recurring dream, a vision of a woman with power that glowed like moonlight, standing between Magnus and a shadowy force. The same woman who had begun to haunt Magnus's own dreams. "You know my thoughts on prophecies and omens," Magnus replied. "Yet the pain worsens, and the dreams grow more frequent," Garrett countered. "Even you must admit the coincidence is remarkable." Magnus turned to face his oldest friend, his expression hard. "What would you have me do? Postpone a critical alliance to search for a mythical savior? My father died waiting for such a miracle." "Perhaps the time wasn't right then," Garrett suggested. "The old texts say the Moon Queen will appear when the need is greatest. With war looming and your pain increasing—" "Enough!" Magnus's voice carried the unmistakable edge of an alpha command, though he rarely used such power on Garrett. "I will hear no more of this. Tonight I will announce my engagement to Lady Vivian. The alliance will be secured. The southern threat will be contained. That is what will save our kingdom, not fairy tales about moon magic and destined queens." Garrett bowed his head in acknowledgement, though Magnus could sense his friend's disappointment. "As you wish, Your Majesty. I'll send Oliver to help you prepare for the banquet." After Garrett departed, Magnus sank into a chair, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability no one else would ever witness. The pain had become his constant companion, a shadow that grew longer and darker with each passing year. The royal physicians had long ago exhausted their remedies. The kingdom's most powerful healers had tried and failed to lift what they called a curse bound in blood and sealed by the moon. Magnus closed his eyes, and unbidden, the dream woman's face appeared in his mind, not the polished beauty of Vivian Thornwood, but something wilder, more authentic, a face with eyes that seemed to carry their own light. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to imagine a different fate, a different future than the one duty had carved for him. Then he banished the thought. Dreams were luxuries kings could ill afford. Deep beneath Stormhold Castle, in the servants' quarters where sunlight never reached, Lyra scrubbed the stone floors until her hands bled. At 23, she had spent 5 years in this castle, yet remained as invisible as the day she arrived. An Omega without a wolf. Wolfless, they called her, with the same tone they might say diseased or cursed. She dunked her brush into the bucket of soapy water, leaving a faint pink swirl as her blood mixed with the suds. The sharp sting was nothing compared to the daily wounds of existing as less than nothing in a world where status was determined by the strength of your inner wolf. "Still at it, girl?" Oliver's gruff voice echoed in the empty hallway. The elderly head chef was one of the few who spoke to Lyra as though she were actually human. Though his gray-streaked beard and permanent scowl intimidated newer servants, Lyra had long ago glimpsed the kindness behind his rough exterior. "The banquet is tonight," she replied, sitting back on her heels. "Lady Helena wants the East Wing spotless for Lord Thornwood's entourage." Oliver snorted. "Polishing stones for people who won't even look down to see them. Come with me for a moment. I need help in the kitchens." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Oliver had a dozen kitchen assistants at his command, but it was a kindness, a few minutes' respite from the back-breaking labor that had been Lyra's lot since dawn. In the relative privacy of the massive castle kitchens, Oliver pressed a mug of hot cider into her raw hands. "Drink, then wrap those hands properly. Can't have you bleeding all over the place." "Thank you." She sipped the spiced cider gratefully, the warmth spreading through her chest like a forgotten memory of comfort. Oliver busied himself with a pot of stew, his movements efficient despite his age. He had been a soldier once, Lyra knew, before an injury had ended his fighting days. Now he commanded the royal kitchens with the same tactical precision he had once brought to the battlefield. "There's talk," he said without looking at her, "that the king will announce his engagement tonight." Lyra nodded. "To Lady Thornwood. Everyone knows. Not everyone approves. An alliance built on politics rather than the true bond." Oliver tapped his chest, indicating the sacred connection between true mates that transcended political arrangements. "The old ways are being forgotten." Lyra remained silent. What did it matter to her who the king married? The affairs of nobles and royals existed in a different world than hers, one she could observe but never touch. Oliver seemed to read her thoughts. Even the lowest servant is affected by who sits on the throne beside the king. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I knew your mother, girl." Lyra's head snapped up. In 5 years, Oliver had never mentioned her mother, though he was one of the few who knew Lyra wasn't born to servitude, but had been taken in after her mother's death when she was 18. "What about her?" Lyra asked, trying and failing to keep the eagerness from her voice. "She wasn't what they said," Oliver replied cryptically. "Neither are you." Before Lyra could press him for more, the kitchen doors burst open as a flurry of servants entered, arms laden with fresh vegetables from the castle gardens. Oliver immediately barked orders, his demeanor shifting back to the gruff head chef. Whatever window had briefly opened into the past had closed again. "Back to your duties, girl," he said, though his eyes held a meaning Lyra couldn't decipher. "And come to my quarters after the servants' dinner. I have something for you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of exhausting labor. The entire castle hummed with preparation. Floors polished, silver buffed, flowers arranged, and food prepared on a scale that could feed a small village. Lyra moved through it all like a ghost, present but unseen. Even when she accidentally bumped into a beta servant carrying linens, the woman simply stepped around her without acknowledgement, as if Lyra were merely a piece of furniture in her path. By the time the servants' dinner ended, a hurried affair of leftover stew and hard bread eaten standing in the kitchen, Lyra's entire body ached with fatigue. Still, curiosity propelled her to Oliver's modest quarters, tucked behind the kitchens. The old chef was waiting, his small room illuminated by a single oil lamp. Without preamble, he handed her a bundle wrapped in clean kitchen linen. "Your mother left this with me before she died," he said. "Made me swear I'd give it to you when the time was right. Think that time might be now, with changes coming." Lyra unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers to reveal a dress of white silk, so fine it seemed to flow like water in her hands. She had never touched anything so beautiful, let alone owned it. Among servants, especially wolfless ones, clothing was purely functional, rough brown homespun that marked their status as surely as a brand. "I can't keep this," she whispered, though her fingers clutched the fabric possessively. "If anyone saw me with it—" "Hide it," Oliver instructed, "but keep it close. Your mother said you'd need it someday, though she didn't say why, said it was your birthright." Birthright. The word felt foreign, impossible. Wolfless Omegas had no birthright except suffering and servitude. "Who was she, Oliver? Really?" Lyra asked, finally voicing the question that had haunted her for years. The old chef's expression softened. "Someone important. Someone who scared powerful people. That's all I can say for now. Less you know, safer you are." He gestured to the dress. "Hide that now and get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough for questions." Lyra returned to the tiny alcove she called her own, a space barely large enough for her thin mattress and a small wooden chest containing her few possessions. With careful movements, she hid the white dress beneath her mattress, her mind whirling with possibilities and questions. Her mother had been a servant in the castle, or so Lyra had always been told. She had died from a fever when Lyra was 18, leaving her daughter with no family, no status, and apparently no wolf. Lyra had been permitted to stay on as a servant out of what she had assumed was reluctant charity. But Oliver's words suggested a different story, one with secrets and danger. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, her dreams filled with wolves running beneath a full moon and a tall figure with eyes that glowed like amber fire. She woke before dawn, unsettled and somehow expectant, as though her body knew something momentous approached, even if her mind did not. The day of the banquet brought chaos to the castle. Lyra was assigned to help prepare guest chambers for the Thornwood entourage, which meant carrying endless buckets of hot water for baths, freshening linens, and polishing furniture that already gleamed. By mid-afternoon, her previous wounds had reopened, red stains appearing on the linens she carried. She was returning from delivering fresh towels when Lady Vivian Thornwood herself rounded the corner, accompanied by two elegantly dressed attendants. Lyra immediately pressed herself against the wall and lowered her gaze, following the protocol for servants encountering nobility. Instead of passing by, however, Lady Vivian stopped directly in front of her. "Look at me, servant." Lyra reluctantly raised her eyes. Lady Vivian was truly beautiful, tall and regal, with golden hair and the confident posture of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Her blue eyes assessed Lyra with clinical detachment. "Your name?" "Lyra, my lady." A flicker of recognition crossed Vivian's face, though Lyra couldn't imagine why. She was certain she had never served the Thornwood family before. "You're bleeding on the floor," Vivian observed, her tone suggesting Lyra had committed this offense deliberately. "And you smell wrong. You're the wolfless one they speak of, aren't you?" The question carried no genuine curiosity, only the casual cruelty of someone confirming a specimen's defect. Before Lyra could respond, one of Vivian's attendants whispered something in her ear. Whatever was said caused Vivian's eyes to narrow with sudden interest. "Come with me," she commanded. "I have need of your services." Lyra had no choice but to follow. They proceeded not to the guest chambers, but toward the servants' quarters, Vivian moving with purpose, despite supposedly being unfamiliar with the castle layout. When they reached the small hallway leading to Lyra's alcove, Vivian turned to her attendants. "Wait here," she instructed, then gestured for Lyra to lead the way. With growing dread, Lyra led Vivian to her tiny space. The noblewoman's presence seemed to fill the cramped alcove, her expensive perfume overwhelming in the confined area. "Show me your possessions," Vivian commanded. "My lady, I have very little—" "Now!" The word carried the unmistakable weight of authority. With shaking hands, Lyra opened her small wooden chest, displaying her meager belongings: 2 additional servant dresses, a worn hairbrush that had been her mother's, a small wooden wolf figurine, and a thin blanket for winter. Vivian studied the items without touching them, then smiled coldly. "Lift your mattress." Ice flooded Lyra's veins. She hesitated, earning a sharp look from Vivian. "I said, lift your mattress, Wolfless, unless you'd prefer I call the guards to do it for you." Slowly, Lyra complied. The white silk dress lay revealed, its pristine fabric an alien presence among her humble surroundings. Vivian's smile widened with satisfaction. How interesting! A servant with a dress worth more than she could earn in 5 years. A dress that looks remarkably similar to one that disappeared from my cousin's wardrobe some months ago. "It was my mother's," Lyra protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Was it now? And was your mother a noblewoman with access to silver mist silk? Or perhaps she was a thief, like daughter, like mother?" Vivian reached down and lifted the dress, examining it with exaggerated care. "Yes, this is definitely from the Silver Mist region. Only noble houses have access to such material." "Please, my lady, it's all I have of her." "Be silent." Vivian's tone was ice. "Here is what will happen. You will bathe and make yourself presentable. You will wear this dress to tonight's banquet. You will stand where I tell you to stand and do exactly as I instruct. Do you understand?" Confusion joined Lyra's fear. "The banquet? But servants aren't allowed." "Did I ask for your opinion on castle protocol? You'll attend as my personal guest. Consider it an honor few of your station ever receive." Vivian's smile never reached her eyes. "You have 3 hours to prepare. My attendants will collect you." After Vivian departed, Lyra sank to her thin mattress, her mind racing. This was clearly some kind of trap, but to what end? Why would a noblewoman like Vivian Thornwood concern herself with a wolfless servant? And how had she known exactly where to find the dress? The most terrifying possibility was that somehow Vivian knew something about Lyra's mother, something connected to Oliver's cryptic warnings. But that made no sense. Lady Vivian was from the Eastern Territories and had likely never visited Stormhold before today. Regardless of the reason, Lyra had no choice but to comply. Defying a high-ranking beta like Vivian would result in punishment severe enough that her wolfless status might not protect her from permanent injury or worse. With trembling hands, she gathered what she would need to make herself presentable for a royal banquet. The very idea was absurd, like asking a crow to attend a gathering of peacocks. Yet something about the situation tickled at her memory, a half-remembered folk tale about a servant forced to attend a royal ball. In the story, the servant had been rescued by a handsome prince. But this was no fairy tale, and King Magnus was no rescuing prince. He was Alpha of Alphas, a warrior king whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had unified the fractured northern territories through both diplomacy and conquest. Even the other Alphas feared his power and the terrible force of his anger when roused. A man like that would never notice a servant, let alone a wolfless Omega. No, whatever game Lady Vivian was playing, Lyra would face it alone, as she had faced everything since her mother's death. She could only hope to survive the humiliation with enough dignity to continue her life in the shadows afterward. The hours passed too quickly. Lyra bathed in the servants' washroom, scrubbing her skin until it was pink and raw. She brushed her long chestnut hair until it shone, then bound it in a simple style that was the best she could manage without help. When she finally slipped the white silk dress over her head, the fabric settled against her skin like cool water, conforming to curves she hadn't known she possessed. The servant who came to collect her was one of Vivian's attendants, a beta female whose nose wrinkled with disgust at Lyra's scent, or lack thereof. Wolfless Omegas lacked the distinctive scent markers that identified pack and status, making them olfactory ghosts in a society where scent was as important as sight. "Follow me," the attendant ordered, not bothering to hide her contempt. "And remember, you speak only when spoken to, keep your eyes lowered, and stand exactly where Lady Vivian positions you." The journey to the Great Hall felt like a march to execution. Servants they passed stared in shock at Lyra's transformation, whispers following in their wake. The dress, beautiful as it was, felt like a costume, a lie wrapped around her body that would only make her inevitable humiliation more complete. The Great Hall of Stormhold was magnificent beyond anything Lyra had imagined. Though she had cleaned its floors countless times, she had never seen it in its full glory. Hundreds of candles casting golden light across the vast space, banners of royal crimson and silver hanging from the vaulted ceiling, long tables laden with more food than Lyra had seen in her entire life. The kingdom's nobility filled the hall, their fine clothing and jewels creating a kaleidoscope of color and texture that overwhelmed the senses. At the high table sat King Magnus himself, his powerful presence commanding attention even in silence. His dark hair was pulled back from a face that might have been considered handsome if not for its severity, strong jawline covered with a neatly trimmed beard, penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate and dismiss in the same glance. Beside him was an empty seat, presumably reserved for Lady Vivian. The attendant led Lyra not to a table, but to a position along the wall, visible from the high table but far enough away to mark her as insignificant. "Stand here. Do not move unless instructed." For what felt like hours, Lyra stood frozen in place, a statue in white silk that no one bothered to observe. Servants bustled past without recognizing her. Nobles conversed and laughed, their gazes sliding over her as if she were simply part of the wall decoration. The familiar invisibility was almost comforting after the fear of confrontation. Then Lady Vivian made her entrance, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson that contrasted dramatically with Lyra's white. She processed through the hall like a conquering queen, accepting admiration as her natural due. When she reached the high table, King Magnus rose to greet her with formal courtesy, though Lyra noticed his expression remained impassive. As the feast progressed, Lyra began to hope that perhaps she had misunderstood Vivian's intentions. Perhaps this was merely some strange test or ritual that would conclude with her returning to the servants' quarters, exhausted but unharmed. The white dress would be confiscated, of course, but that was a small price for escaping public humiliation. Her hope died when, midway through the third course, Vivian rose from her seat and struck a crystal goblet with a silver spoon. The clear ringing silenced conversation throughout the hall. "My lords and ladies," Vivian's voice carried effortlessly across the vast space. "Before His Majesty makes his important announcement, I wish to share something curious that came to my attention today." A chill of premonition settled over Lyra. This was it, the trap springing closed. Vivian's smile was radiant with malice as she continued. "It seems we have an unexpected guest among us tonight." She turned and pointed directly at Lyra. "This servant girl, wearing a dress of silver mist silk that mysteriously disappeared from my cousin's wardrobe some months ago." All eyes in the hall turned to Lyra. The weight of their collective gaze was physically painful, pressing against her skin like burning brands. She wanted to run, to hide, to become truly invisible rather than the center of unwanted attention. "Come forward, girl," Vivian commanded. "Show everyone your finery." Lyra's legs moved of their own accord, carrying her into the center of the hall, where there was nowhere to hide from hundreds of evaluating stares. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "The dress suits you remarkably well," Vivian said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "One might almost mistake you for someone of consequence, rather than a wolfless nothing who scrubs floors." Titters of laughter rippled through the crowd. Lyra kept her eyes fixed on the floor, shame burning her cheeks. "Tell us, girl," Vivian continued, "how does a servant come to possess such a valuable garment?" Lyra's throat constricted with fear. "It was my mother's," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Your mother's?" Vivian repeated with exaggerated surprise. "And was your mother perhaps secretly a duchess? Or did she simply have excellent taste in stolen goods?" More laughter, louder now. Lyra's vision blurred with unshed tears. "Regardless of how she acquired it," Vivian continued, lifting a goblet of dark red wine, "it seems only fitting to return the dress to its proper condition, servant brown." With deliberate slowness, Vivian descended from the high table and approached Lyra. Time seemed to stretch and distort as she lifted the goblet, her intention unmistakable. Lyra stood frozen, unable to move or speak in her own defense. The wine arced through the air like liquid rubies before splashing across Lyra's chest, instantly transforming the pristine white silk into a spreading stain of crimson. The cold shock of it broke Lyra's paralysis, a small gasp escaping her lips. Laughter erupted throughout the hall, not from everyone, but from enough that the sound became a physical force, battering against Lyra's already fragile composure. Vivian's triumphant smile completed the humiliation. "There," she said loudly enough for all to hear. "Now you look like what you truly are, soiled and worthless." Something inside Lyra shattered. Not her spirit, which had endured 5 years of daily indignities, but the careful wall she had built around her emotions. Anger flooded through her veins, hot and unfamiliar. She lifted her gaze to meet Vivian's, no longer caring about protocol or consequences. "I may be worthless in your eyes," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "but at least I don't need to destroy others to feel powerful." Vivian's expression shifted from triumph to fury. She raised her hand to strike, and Lyra braced for the blow. It never came. "Enough." A single word, spoken not loudly, but with such absolute authority that every person in the hall froze. King Magnus had risen from his seat, his expression thunderous. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees as his alpha power radiated outward in palpable waves. "Everyone will kneel," he commanded. "Now." It was not a request, but a compulsion that even the highest-ranking nobles could not resist. Throughout the hall, people dropped to their knees, first those nearest the high table, then rippling outward until everyone except the king himself was kneeling. Even Vivian, her face contorted with shock and outrage, found herself on her knees. Only Lyra remained standing, immune to the alpha command due to her wolfless state. She stared at the king in confusion and terror, certain she had somehow made the situation infinitely worse. Magnus descended from the high table, his movements those of a predator, controlled, purposeful, deadly. The crowd parted before him as he approached Lyra, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. When he stood before her, close enough that she could detect his scent, pine forests and mountain storms and something uniquely his, Lyra finally remembered to curtsy, lowering her gaze as protocol demanded. "Look at me," he said, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. Slowly, Lyra raised her eyes to meet his. Something strange happened in that moment, a jolt, like lightning passing between them. Magnus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise quickly masked. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring as he scented her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lyra, Your Majesty." "Lyra." He spoke her name as if tasting it. "Do you know what you are?" The question was so unexpected that Lyra couldn't immediately process it. "I'm a servant, Your Majesty." "No." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "You are under my protection now." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Lord Thornwood, still kneeling, broke protocol to speak. "Your Majesty, surely this is unnecessary. The girl is merely a servant who stole—" "Silence!" Magnus did not shout, but the word carried the full weight of his alpha authority. "I did not ask for your opinion, Lord Thornwood." He turned back to Lyra, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. "You will come with me," he stated. It was not a request, but a decree, absolute and final. Another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the hall. Vivian's beautiful face was a mask of stunned disbelief, her carefully laid plans crumbling before her eyes. Lord Thornwood's complexion had turned an alarming shade of purple as he struggled between protocol and outrage. "Your Majesty," he managed finally, "forgive her. She is simple, a wolfless girl from a disgraced bloodline." His voice dripped with contempt. "She is of no use to you. I will have her punished severely for her clumsiness." Magnus's gaze shifted to the Lord, and the temperature in the hall dropped another few degrees. "I did not ask for your opinion," he repeated, his voice laced with ice. "And I did not say she was of use. I said she is under my protection." He turned his back on the sputtering nobleman, a dismissal more profound than any verbal rebuke. Garrett, who had materialized at the king's side as if conjured, placed a firm but not unkind hand on Lyra's arm. "Come," he said quietly. As Garrett led her from the hall, Lyra's legs moved of their own accord. Her mind reeled with terror and confusion. She was being taken, not punished, not killed, but taken to what fate she couldn't imagine. Was this a rescue or a different kind of trap? A life of servitude in the royal chambers instead of the general areas? Something worse? The last thing she saw as she left the great hall was Vivian's face, a complex mixture of shock, fury, and a strange, ugly flicker of jealousy. Lyra, the worthless Omega, had somehow captured the attention of the most powerful man in the kingdom. The world had turned upside down in a single evening, and Lyra had no idea what awaited her in this new, terrifying reality. But as she followed Garrett through corridors she had only ever scrubbed, one certainty settled in her mind: nothing would ever be the same again. The royal chambers of Stormhold Castle occupied the entire eastern tower, a series of interconnected rooms that few servants ever saw. Lyra followed Garrett through corridors lined with ancient tapestries depicting wolf-shifters in battle and ceremonial hunts beneath full moons. Each step took her further from the life she had known and deeper into a world she had only glimpsed from its margins. They stopped before massive double doors carved with the royal crest, a wolf with a crescent moon between its jaws. Garrett turned to her, his weathered face unreadable. "Wait here," he instructed before entering the chamber, leaving Lyra alone in the corridor with her thoughts and the wine still drying on her ruined dress. The events in the great hall replayed in her mind like fragments of a fever dream. Lady Vivian's cruelty had been calculated and precise, a public humiliation designed to reinforce Lyra's worthlessness. But the king's intervention made no sense. Monarchs did not concern themselves with the mistreatment of servants, particularly not wolfless ones. Yet Magnus had commanded the entire assembly to kneel and had claimed her under his protection with a certainty that brooked no argument. The doors opened, and Garrett reappeared. "Enter," he said, stepping aside. Lyra hesitated at the threshold, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frightened bird. Then, drawing what courage she possessed, she stepped into the king's private chambers. The room was unexpectedly austere for a monarch. Functional furniture of dark wood, walls lined with maps and bookshelves rather than decorative flourishes, a massive stone fireplace with a fire burning low. The only luxuries were a bearskin rug before the hearth and the enormous canopied bed visible through a doorway to an adjoining room. King Magnus stood at a window overlooking the moonlit mountains, his back to her. He had removed his formal jacket, and the white shirt beneath stretched across shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a kingdom. Without turning, he spoke. "You're afraid." It wasn't a question, but an observation, delivered in the same deep voice that had commanded nobles to kneel. "Yes, Your Majesty," Lyra answered truthfully, seeing no benefit in lying to a man who could likely smell her fear. He turned then, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. Up close, without the distorting lens of terror and public humiliation, she could see the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes and mouth, signs of private battles fought away from public view. "You needn't be. Despite what you may have heard about me, I don't make a habit of harming those under my protection. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but I don't understand why I would be under your protection at all." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "Direct. Good. There's been enough deception in these walls." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit." Lyra obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. Magnus remained standing, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What do you know about the royal bloodline curse?" he asked abruptly. The question was so unexpected that Lyra blinked in confusion. "Only what everyone knows, Your Majesty, that since King Alaric's time, all male heirs of the royal line suffer some kind of affliction." "Affliction." Magnus repeated the word with a bitter edge. A diplomatic term for unending agony. Every male heir of my bloodline, upon reaching maturity, begins to experience pain that worsens with each passing year. No medicine eases it. No healer can cure it. Eventually it drives most to madness or an early grave." Lyra remained silent, uncertain why the king would share such information with her of all people. Magnus continued, his gaze fixed on the fire now. 5 centuries of suffering, because my ancestor betrayed a sacred oath to the moon goddess. Her vengeance has been thorough and unyielding. He turned back to her suddenly. "Until tonight." "I don't understand." Magnus approached, stopping directly before her chair. "When I stood near you in the great hall, the pain ceased. For the first time in 14 years, I felt peace." Shock rendered Lyra momentarily speechless. This made no sense. She was nothing, a wolfless Omega without power or importance. How could her presence affect a curse embedded in royal blood for 5 centuries? "There must be some mistake," she finally managed. "I thought the same. So I tested my theory by leaving the hall briefly while Garrett kept you there. The moment I moved beyond a certain distance, the pain returned. When I re-entered your vicinity, it subsided again." His expression hardened with certainty. There is no mistake. Lyra's mind raced. If what Magnus said was true, it explained his unprecedented action in the Great Hall, but it raised far more questions than it answered. "What does it mean?" she asked. "That is what we must discover." Magnus moved to a small table and poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. He offered one to Lyra. "First, you will tell me everything about yourself and your family." Lyra accepted the glass, but didn't drink. "There's little to tell, Your Majesty. My mother was a servant in this castle. She died 5 years ago from a fever. I never knew my father. I have no family, no wolf spirit, nothing that would explain this." "Your mother's name?" "Elara." Something flickered in Magnus's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or suspicion. "And your full name?" "Lyra Ilaran." Magnus exchanged a significant look with Garrett, who had remained silently by the door. Some unspoken communication passed between them before Garrett nodded and departed without a word. "Ilaran is not a servant's family name," Magnus said after a moment. "It's an ancient lineage, thought extinct for generations." Confusion swirled through Lyra's mind. Her mother had never spoken of family heritage or ancient lineages. She had been a servant, like Lyra herself, surviving day to day in a world that valued status and strength above all. "I don't understand," she said again, frustration edging into her voice. "If you believe I'm somehow connected to some lost bloodline, you're mistaken. I have no wolf. I'm wolfless, the lowest of the low." "Are you?" Magnus's tone sharpened. "Have you ever transformed? Ever attempted to call forth your wolf spirit?" "Of course not. Wolfless Omegas don't have wolves to call. Everyone knows that." "Everyone can be wrong." He set down his untouched drink and moved to the hearth, bracing one arm against the mantel. "There are more complex truths in this world than what everyone knows. History is written by those with the power to shape it." Before Lyra could respond, the chamber doors opened and Garrett returned, accompanied by a woman Lyra had never seen before. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with silver streaking her dark hair and an unmistakable air of authority despite her plain clothing. "Lyra, this is Healer Lyra," Magnus introduced. "She serves as royal physician and keeper of the old knowledge." The woman approached Lyra, her sharp eyes assessing. "So this is the one," she murmured, "after all these years." Without preamble, she reached out and took Lyra's hand, turning it palm up and tracing the lines there with a weathered finger. "You've been having dreams," the healer stated confidently. "Dreams of running beneath the moon, of forests and mountains you've never seen." Lyra's breath caught. She had never spoken of those dreams to anyone, dismissing them as the pointless longings of a wolfless girl for what could never be hers. "How did you know that?" "Because they're not dreams. They're memories, your wolf's memories, waiting to be awakened." The healer released her hand and turned to Magnus. "She bears the mark, just as the prophecy foretold. the crescent birthmark at the nape of her neck, hidden by her hair. Lyra's hand instinctively went to the back of her neck, where indeed a small crescent-shaped birthmark had been present since birth. But how could the healer know of it without seeing it? "You believe she's truly moon-touched?" Magnus asked, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes intense. "I'm certain of it," Lyra replied. "The timing, the mark, the effect on your curse, all align with the ancient texts. She's not wolfless. She carries the spirit of the white moon wolf, dormant but present." "The what?" Lyra interrupted, her patience for cryptic conversations about herself finally exhausted. "Will someone please explain what's happening in terms I can understand?" Magnus and the healer exchanged glances before he nodded. "You deserve the truth." He gestured to the chair again. "What you're about to learn has been hidden for centuries, protected by a select few who remembered the old ways when others forgot." The healer took up the narrative, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "Long ago, when the first shifters made their covenant with the wolf spirits, there existed a special bloodline blessed by the moon goddess herself. They carried not ordinary wolves, but rare spirit wolves, the white moon wolves, capable of healing, prophecy, and moon magic. They were known as the Alaran line, the moon-touched. But they were feared by those who craved power," Magnus continued. "An ancient king, my ancestor, betrayed and hunted them to near extinction, fearing their ability to challenge his rule. For this betrayal, the moon goddess cursed his bloodline with unending pain that no healer could soothe. Except," the healer added, her eyes fixed on Lyra, "a true-born daughter of the Alaran line. The prophecy states, when the last daughter of Moonblood returns, bearing the crescent mark, the curse shall begin to lift. Sun and moon must unite to break the chains of 5 centuries. Lyra shook her head, the information overwhelming her capacity to process it. "This makes no sense. I'm just a servant. My mother was just a servant." "Your mother," Magnus said quietly, "was Alara of the Alaran line, last known survivor of the Moon-Touched. She fled the Eastern Territories during the Great Purge 30 years ago and sought sanctuary here, disguised as a servant. Few knew her true identity, my father among them." A memory surfaced in Lyra's mind, her mother's voice, soft in the darkness. "Remember who you are, little moon. When the time comes, you'll understand your purpose." "If what you're saying is true," Lyra said slowly, "why has no one recognized me before now? Why have I spent years scrubbing floors if I'm supposedly from some special bloodline?" "Because your mother bound your wolf spirit before she died," the healer explained. "A protective spell to keep you safe until you reached full maturity. The binding made you appear wolfless to others, masking your true nature." "And tonight," Magnus added, "something caused that binding to begin weakening. Perhaps proximity to a royal alpha of my bloodline, perhaps simply the passage of time. But when I scented you in the Great Hall, beneath the absence others perceive was the unmistakable signature of a moon wolf." Lyra's world tilted on its axis. Everything she had believed about herself, her identity, her place in the world, the limits of what she could be or become, suddenly revealed as elaborate falsehoods designed to protect her. The implications were too vast to comprehend fully. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice small in the vast chamber. "Now," Magnus said with quiet authority, "we begin your training to awaken your true nature. And perhaps, if the prophecy holds true, we find a way to break a curse that has plagued my family for 500 years." Before Lyra could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside, raised voices and the sound of running feet. Garrett moved to the door, hand on the sword at his hip, but before he could open it, the doors burst inward. Oliver the head chef stood there, bleeding from a cut above his eye, supported by a castle guard. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," the guard panted, but he insisted it couldn't wait. "Says it concerns the girl." "Let him speak," Magnus commanded. Oliver straightened, his gruff exterior giving way to unexpected dignity despite his injury. "They're coming, Your Majesty. Blackwood's men. They know about her." His eyes found Lyra's. "They've always known. Been waiting for the binding to weaken enough to sense her. That's why they pushed for the Thornwood Alliance, to get close enough to eliminate her before you found her." "Blackwood?" Lyra echoed, the name unfamiliar. Magnus's expression darkened to something terrible. "Demon Blackwood, the dark sorcerer who crafted the curse on my bloodline, supposedly dead for 3 centuries, but some evils never truly die." He turned to Garrett. "Sound the alarm. Secure the castle. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." As Garrett hurried to obey, Magnus approached Oliver. "How do you know this?" The old chef straightened proudly despite his injury. "Because I'm one of the last of the Wolf Guard, Your Majesty. Sworn to protect the Ilaran bloodline since before your grandfather's time. Been watching over the girl since her mother died, waiting for this day." Understanding dawned in Lyra's mind. Oliver's kindness, his cryptic warnings, the dress he had given her, all part of a duty she hadn't known existed, a duty to protect a heritage she hadn't known was hers. "How much time do we have?" Magnus demanded. "Not much. They'll attack at moonrise. Blackwood's power is strongest then." Magnus turned to the healer. "Begin the unbinding ritual. We need her awakened before they arrive." "But she's not ready," the healer protested. "The ritual normally requires preparation, meditation." "We don't have time for normal," Magnus cut her off. "She's strong enough. She must be." The next hours passed in a blur of activity and preparation. While Magnus and Garrett organized the castle's defenses, Lyra found herself in a small chamber deep within the castle walls, a secret room whose existence few knew of, its walls inscribed with ancient symbols of the moon in all its phases. The healer prepared herbs and crystals, arranging them in patterns on the stone floor, while explaining in hurried fragments what would happen. "The ritual will remove your mother's binding spell, allowing your true nature to emerge. It will be intense. Your wolf has been caged since birth. She'll be eager for freedom, perhaps too eager. You must maintain control." "How?" Lyra asked, fear and anticipation warring within her. "I've never even felt my wolf before. How can I control something I don't know?" "Your mother's blood flows in your veins. The knowledge is there, dormant but present." The healer pressed a smooth moonstone into Lyra's palm. "This will help focus your energy. When the moment comes, embrace your wolf, don't fight her. You are not 2 beings but one, separated only by the binding spell." They positioned Lyra in the center of a circle formed by moonstones and silver dust. The healer began chanting in an ancient language, words that seemed to resonate with something deep within Lyra's bones. As the chant continued, the temperature in the chamber dropped dramatically, frost forming on the stone walls despite the summer heat outside. A strange pressure built inside Lyra's chest, as if something long compressed was expanding, seeking freedom. The sensation wasn't painful exactly, but overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing you must jump, but fearing the fall. "Don't resist," the healer instructed, her voice seeming to come from a great distance. "Let her rise." The pressure intensified until Lyra thought she might shatter from within. Then, like a dam breaking, it released in a rush of sensation and awareness so acute that she gasped. Colors became more vivid, scents more distinct. She could smell the healer's concern, the ancient dust in the chamber, even the distant scent of the forest beyond the castle walls. With these new senses came memories that weren't hers, or rather, weren't her human selves. Running through moonlit forests, feeling the earth beneath 4 paws, howling at a silver moon that answered with power flowing into her very being. The memories of a wolf spirit that had been part of her all along, silenced but never truly gone. When the final words of the ritual faded, Lyra opened eyes she hadn't realized she'd closed. The healer was watching her with an expression of awe and trepidation. "Did it work?" Lyra asked, then paused at the sound of her own voice, somehow both the same and different, carrying a new resonance. "See for yourself," the healer replied, gesturing to a silver mirror on the wall. Lyra approached it cautiously, then froze at the sight of her reflection. Her appearance hadn't changed dramatically, yet something was undeniably different. Her eyes, once plain brown, now held flecks of silver that seemed to catch and reflect the light. Her posture had shifted subtly, carrying a new confidence that came from deep within. "I can feel her," Lyra whispered. "My wolf. She's joyful, free." "The white moon wolf," the healer confirmed, "one of the rarest and most powerful spirit wolves, but you've only just begun to access her abilities. Full transformation will take time and training." Before Lyra could respond, the chamber door opened and Garrett entered, his expression grave. "They've been sighted approaching from the north," he reported. "At least 50 warriors led by Thornwood himself, and with them, something else, something that doesn't move like a man or wolf." "Blackwood," the healer said, her voice hushed with ancient fear. "Or whatever remains of him after centuries of dark magic." "The king requests your presence in the war room," Garrett told Lyra. "Both of you." As they hurried through corridors now filled with armed guards, Lyra struggled to integrate her new awareness with the crisis unfolding around her. Part of her, the servant girl who had spent years trying to remain invisible, wanted to hide, to find some small corner where the clash of powers beyond her understanding could pass her by. But another part, the newly awakened wolf spirit, urged her forward, eager to stand beside her alpha and face whatever threatened their territory. Their alpha? The thought came unbidden, but felt right in some primal way she couldn't articulate. Magnus wasn't her alpha in any formal sense, yet something in her responded to him on a level beyond conscious choice. The war room was a hive of controlled activity when they arrived. Magnus stood at a large table covered with maps, Garrett at his side. Other men and women, military commanders Lyra assumed, clustered around, receiving orders and reporting positions. When Magnus looked up and saw Lyra, something passed across his features, relief, perhaps, or recognition. He straightened and approached her, his eyes widening slightly as he noted the silver flecks in hers. "It worked," he said, not quite a question. "Yes," Lyra confirmed, "though I'm not sure what it means yet." "It means hope," he replied simply. Then, turning to include the others, "Our scouts report Thornwood's forces approaching from the North Forest. They'll reach the castle walls within the hour. With them is a figure matching descriptions of Demon Blackwood from the ancient texts, a shadow that moves like smoke, taking neither human nor wolf form." "The dark sorcerer himself," the healer murmured, "after all this time." "Their target is clear," Magnus continued, his gaze returning to Lyra. "They seek to eliminate the last of the Ilaran line before the prophecy can be fulfilled, before the curse can be broken." "Why now?" one of the commanders asked. "If this girl is what you claim, why has Blackwood waited until now to strike?" "Because her binding spell protected her," the healer explained. "It masked her true nature from magical detection. But as she reached full maturity, the spell began to weaken. Tonight, when she encountered an alpha of the royal bloodline, it weakened enough for her scent to emerge, for her true nature to begin awakening. Blackwood would have sensed it immediately." "So would any powerful alpha," Magnus added, "including Thornwood, who has been Blackwood's ally for generations, though few know it. The proposed alliance with his daughter was never about political advantage. It was about getting close enough to identify and eliminate the moon-touched heir." Lyra struggled to process the implications. "You knew? About Lady Vivian and her father?" "I suspected," Magnus corrected, "but couldn't prove it without evidence. The alliance, distasteful as it was, provided an opportunity to observe them closely." "And me?" Lyra asked. "Did you know about me before tonight?" A shadow crossed Magnus's face. "I knew your mother. Not her true identity, but I knew her as a servant when I was young. When she died, I honored my father's request to allow her daughter to remain in the castle's service." His expression hardened. "Had I known who you truly were, you would never have spent a day scrubbing floors." Before Lyra could respond, a horn sounded from the castle walls. 3 long blasts, signaling imminent attack. Magnus's demeanor shifted instantly from contemplative to commanding. "To your positions," he ordered the commanders, who hurried to obey. To Garrett, he said, "Take her to the sanctuary chamber. It's the most defensible position in the castle, and the silver-lined walls will help block Blackwood's magic." Garrett nodded, but Lyra stepped forward. "No." Magnus turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. No one said no to the Alpha King. "I won't hide while others fight because of me," she continued. "This prophecy, this curse, this conflict, it involves me directly. I should be part of it." "You have no combat training, no control over your newly awakened abilities," Magnus countered. "You would be a liability on the battlefield." "Perhaps in direct combat," Lyra acknowledged. "But according to your healer, the White Moon Wolf has abilities beyond fighting. Healing, sensing intentions, connecting with moon energy. Let me use what gifts I have." Magnus studied her for a long moment, seeing not the servant girl of hours before, but something new emerging, a strength and determination that matched the silver light in her eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. You'll remain with the healer in the Eastern Tower. From there, you can channel healing energy to our wounded while remaining relatively safe from direct assault." It was a compromise, but Lyra accepted it with a nod. She would prove her worth, show that she deserved the heritage suddenly thrust upon her. Though every instinct urged her to remain near Magnus, she understood the tactical wisdom of separation. If Blackwood sought to kill the last Ilaran heir and the royal Alpha together, giving him two separate targets complicated his task. As they prepared to part ways, Magnus caught her arm, his touch sending a jolt of awareness through her newly sensitized nerves. "Be careful," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We've waited 5 centuries for you. I won't lose you on the same night I found you." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of connection beyond prophecy or curse. Then he was gone, striding toward the castle gates where he would lead the defense personally, as Alpha Kings had done since time immemorial. The Eastern Tower provided a clear view of the northern approach to the castle. From its windows, Lyra could see torches moving through the forest, Thornwood's forces approaching with unnatural synchronization, as if guided by a single mind. Behind them came something worse, a shadowy mass that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, flowing like ink spilled across the landscape. "Blackwood," the healer confirmed, following Lyra's gaze. "Or what remains of him after centuries of dark magic. Such power exacts a terrible price from those who wield it." "What can I do against something like that?" Lyra asked, sudden doubt overwhelming her earlier confidence. "You are moon-touched, last daughter of a bloodline blessed by the goddess herself. Your very existence is anathema to his darkness." The healer guided Lyra to a circular platform in the center of the tower room, inlaid with silver and moonstone. "Stand here. Open yourself to the moonlight. Let it fill you, strengthen you, connect you to your ancestors who stand watch from beyond the veil." Lyra obeyed, positioning herself on the platform. Moonlight streamed through the tower windows, bathing her in silver radiance that seemed to sink into her skin like cool water. The sensation was both foreign and intimately familiar, like returning to a home she hadn't known she'd lost. As she surrendered to the moonlight's embrace, her awareness expanded beyond the tower walls. She could sense the castle's defenders, their determination, their fear, their loyalty to their Alpha King. Beyond them, she sensed the approaching enemy, a mass of hatred and bloodlust driven by Thornwood's ambition and something darker behind him, ancient malice incarnate. And at the center of it all, burning like a golden flame against the darkness, she sensed Magnus. His strength, his pain, his unwavering resolve to protect his people and his territory. Without conscious direction, her awareness reached toward him, drawn by an instinctual connection she couldn't name but couldn't deny. To her surprise, she felt him respond, his consciousness brushing against hers like a wolf acknowledging its packmate. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, but in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. A bond, tenuous but real, formed across the distance separating them. The battle began with the screech of ancient hinges as the castle gates opened to allow Magnus and his elite guard to meet Thornwood's forces on the open ground before the walls. From her vantage point, Lyra watched as wolves clashed in a fury of fangs and claws, massive battle-trained shifters tearing into each other with primal ferocity. At the forefront fought Magnus himself, transformed into a wolf of incredible size, his fur the deep black of a moonless night, but for a single streak of silver down his spine. He moved with lethal grace, each attack precisely calculated, each defense seemingly effortless. This was an alpha in his element, defending territory, protecting pack, exercising the full extent of power that was his birthright. Yet even as Magnus's forces engaged Thornwood's warriors, the shadow that was Blackwood remained untouched, observing from the edge of the forest, waiting, watching with patient malevolence. "He's waiting for the right moment," the healer murmured, conserving his strength for when it will be most effective. "For me," Lyra said with sudden certainty, "he's waiting to strike at me." The healer nodded grimly. "You are the only true threat to him. As long as the royal curse remains, his power over this land continues. You represent its breaking, the end of his centuries-long revenge." As if summoned by her understanding, the shadow at the forest's edge began to move, not toward the battle raging before the castle walls, but circling around toward the eastern tower where Lyra stood. The darkness flowed like liquid night, avoiding the clash of wolves and warriors with sinuous purpose. "He comes," the healer said, urgency sharpening her tone. "You must be ready. Remember, you are not just yourself anymore. You are the culmination of a bloodline stretching back to the first covenant between humans and wolves. Their strength is your inheritance." Lyra nodded, fear and determination warring within her as she watched the approaching darkness. Through her newly formed bond with Magnus, she sensed his sudden awareness of the threat, his desperate desire to reach her, thwarted by the wall of enemies between them. "Send me strength," she thought toward him, unsure if he could hear but needing the connection. "I'll face this as you would, without flinching." The response came not in words, but in a surge of something powerful and primal, courage, resolve, and something deeper that she dared not name. It flowed into her like golden fire, complementing the silver moonlight already filling her being. When Blackwood's shadowy form finally reached the base of the tower, beginning to seep upward along the stone walls like viscous smoke, Lyra was ready. Standing in the pool of moonlight, she felt her wolf spirit rising within her, not seeking to transform her body, but lending its ancient wisdom and power to her human form. "He'll try to reach your mind first," the healer warned, positioning herself before the tower room's only door. "To paralyze you with fear, to make you doubt yourself. Remember who you are." The first assault came as the healer predicted, a whisper in Lyra's mind, insidious and cold as a winter midnight. Wolfless, worthless, nothing. You are no heir, no savior. Just a servant girl playing at power she cannot possibly comprehend. The words struck at Lyra's deepest insecurities, the identity she had carried for so long, the sense of worthlessness instilled by years of dismissal and invisibility. For a moment she faltered, the moonlight dimming around her as doubt clouded her connection to her heritage. Then, from the depths of her being, her wolf spirit surged forward with a silent howl of defiance. Not with words, but with pure emotional truth. It reminded her of who she truly was, not the identity forced upon her by circumstance and concealment, but her birthright as daughter of the Alaran line, blessed by the moon goddess herself. "I am Lyra Alaran," she responded silently to the shadow's whispers, "last daughter of the moon-touched, and you have no power over me." The shadow recoiled momentarily, then redoubled its assault. Black tendrils of smoke began to seep through cracks in the tower walls, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape of absolute darkness. Where a face should have been, only 2 points of crimson light burned like malevolent stars. "Little wolf," it spoke, its voice the sound of ancient parchment crumbling to dust. "How long I've waited for this moment, to extinguish the last ember of a bloodline that should have died centuries ago." Lyra stood firm in her circle of moonlight, drawing strength from the silver radiance and the golden warmth of her bond with Magnus. "Why?" she asked, genuine curiosity breaking through her fear. "Why such hatred for my bloodline? What did we ever do to deserve your enmity?" A sound like broken glass grinding together emanated from the shadow. Laughter, Lyra realized with a chill. "Your kind stood between me and absolute power. The Alaran line, with its connection to the moon goddess, was the only force capable of challenging the dark magic I cultivated, so they had to be eliminated. Every last one. Yet here I stand," Lyra said, a newfound confidence strengthening her voice. "An oversight I intend to correct." The shadow surged forward, tendrils of darkness reaching for her throat with palpable malice. Instinctively, Lyra raised her hands, channeling the moonlight that filled her. Silver radiance burst from her palms, meeting the advancing darkness in a clash of opposing forces that shook the tower to its foundations. Where light and shadow met, energy crackled and hissed like water on hot metal. For several heartbeats, they remained locked in stalemate, Lyra's newfound power against Blackwood's centuries of dark sorcery. Then, gradually, the darkness began to push back the light, forcing Lyra to retreat a step. "You are untrained, untested," Blackwood hissed. "I have had 500 years to perfect my craft. You cannot hope to stand against me." He was right, Lyra realized with growing dread. Her power, though real, was raw and unfocused. She had no training, no understanding of how to wield the gifts of her bloodline effectively. Against a foe with centuries of experience, she was hopelessly outmatched. Yet surrender was unthinkable. Not just for herself, but for Magnus, for the kingdom that would remain under Blackwood's malignant influence if she failed. For her mother, who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe until this moment. As the darkness pressed closer, an unexpected memory surfaced. Her mother's voice, singing an old lullaby about the phases of the moon. The song had seemed like a simple children's rhyme, but now Lyra recognized it as something more. A teaching disguised as a bedtime story, imparting ancient knowledge of moon magic to a child too young to understand its significance. Following instinct rather than conscious thought, Lyra began to sing the lullaby, her voice soft but steady against Blackwood's hissing threats. As the familiar melody filled the tower room, the moonlight responding, swirling around her in patterns that matched the phases described in the song. New moon for beginnings, crescent for growth, quarter moon for decision, gibbous for oath. Full moon for power at its highest peak, waning for release when strength grows weak. The shadow faltered, its advance halting as the patterned moonlight began to form a protective sphere around Lyra. Each phase of the moon appeared in succession, glowing sigils floating in the air, connected by threads of silver light. "What is this?" Blackwood snarled, genuine uncertainty in his voice for the first time. The healer, who had been maintaining a protective barrier at the door, answered with wonder in her voice. "The lunar cycle shield, a technique lost for centuries, known only to the highest priestesses of the moon goddess." Lyra continued singing, each verse bringing another phase of the moon to life in glowing silver light. The sphere of protection grew stronger with each completed cycle, pushing back the encroaching darkness inch by inch. Through her bond with Magnus, she sensed his awareness of what was happening, his astonishment and pride flowing into her, adding strength to her efforts. Enraged, Blackwood abandoned subtlety for brute force. The shadow expanded, engulfing the entire tower room except for Lyra's shrinking sphere of moonlight. The temperature plummeted until frost formed on every surface, the cold so intense it burned. "You delay the inevitable," the shadow hissed, its crimson eyes blazing with hatred. "Even if you repel me tonight, I will return, again and again, until the Alaran line is truly extinct, and the royal curse will endure for another 5 centuries of agony." Despite the protection of her moonlight shield, Lyra felt her strength waning. The continuous channeling of power, so new and unfamiliar, drained her reserves rapidly. Her voice faltered, the glow of the moon sigils dimming perceptibly. In that moment of weakness, a tendril of darkness penetrated her defenses, wrapping around her throat with frigid malice. Pain exploded through her body as Blackwood's essence made contact with her skin. Not just physical pain, but a deeper agony that reached into her very soul. "I will take your power for my own," the shadow whispered directly into her mind. "Drain the moon goddess's blessing from your blood, drop by drop. Your death will fuel my magic for another millennium." As consciousness began to fade, Lyra reached desperately for her bond with Magnus. Not asking for help, he was too far away, still locked in battle with Thornwood's forces, but seeking one last connection before darkness claimed her. What she received in return was unexpected, not just Magnus's presence in her mind, but something more: knowledge, understanding. The accumulated wisdom of 20 generations of royal alphas, passed through bloodline memory, that Magnus himself might not have known he carried. With this ancient knowledge came revelation. Blackwood's power and the royal curse were two sides of the same dark magic. Each fed the other in a self-sustaining cycle of suffering. The pain of each royal heir strengthened Blackwood's immortality, while his continued existence ensured the curse remained unbroken. But there was a vulnerability in this symbiotic evil. What sustained could also destroy if the energy flow were reversed. With the last of her strength, Lyra changed tactics. Instead of fighting against Blackwood's dark magic, she opened herself to it, not in surrender, but with purpose. Like a river changing course, she allowed the darkness to flow into her, through her, and then channeled it directly into her connection with Magnus. Through their bond, she sensed his momentary confusion, then understanding, as ancestral knowledge awakened in him as well. In perfect synchronization, though separated by the battlefield between them, they enacted the counter-ritual that had waited 5 centuries to be performed. Magnus, channeling the pain of the royal curse, pain he had endured for 14 years, directed it not inward, but outward, along the bond connecting him to Lyra. She, in turn, took that pain and amplified it with her moon-touched powers, creating a feedback loop of increasing intensity. The shadow sensed the danger too late. As the amplified pain rebounded through the magical connection, it struck the vulnerability in Blackwood's essence, the source of his power now turned against him by those it was meant to torture. A scream of inhuman rage and terror tore through the night as the shadow convulsed, its form losing coherence. The darkness that had seemed so absolute began to dissipate, shredding into tatters of fading malevolence. "This is not the end," Blackwood's voice rasped, growing fainter with each word. "I cannot die. Merely transform." With a final implosion of darkness, the shadow vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill that gradually yielded to the warmth of the returning moonlight. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhaustion claiming her as the immediate danger passed. Through her bond with Magnus, she sensed a corresponding wave of fatigue, but also triumph and wonder. The healer hurried to her side, supporting her with surprising strength for one of her years. "You did it," she said, awe evident in her voice. "You turned his own magic against him. Even the ancient texts only theorized such a possibility." "Not me," Lyra corrected weakly. "Us. Magnus and I together." The healer helped her to a chair as the tower room slowly returned to normal, frost melting from the walls as warmth returned. The prophecy spoke truly. Sun and moon must unite to break the chains of 5 centuries. The royal alpha and the moon-touched heir working as one. "Is it over?" Lyra asked. "Truly over?" The healer's expression sobered. "Blackwood is severely weakened, perhaps banished from this plane entirely. But dark sorcerers of his power rarely die in any conventional sense. He spoke of transformation, not destruction." Before Lyra could question further, the tower door burst open. Garrett stood there, bloodied but alive, his expression urgent. "The battle has turned. When Blackwood vanished, something happened to Thornwood, as if a spell had broken. He's in retreat, but—" He stopped, eyes fixing on Lyra with grave concern. "The king needs you. Now." Dawn broke over Stormhold Castle, painting the ancient stone walls in hues of amber and rose. The battlefield beyond the gates lay eerily silent after a night of chaos and bloodshed. Bodies of the fallen, both Thornwood's forces and defenders of the castle, remained where they had fallen, still forms bathed in the unforgiving light of morning. Lyra stood at the window of the healing chamber, her body weary, but her mind alert with a new awareness that had not existed 24 hours earlier. So much had changed in a single night. Her identity, her understanding of the world, her place within it. Yesterday she had been a servant, invisible and worthless in the eyes of society. Today she was Lyra Alarin, last daughter of a sacred bloodline, wielder of power she barely comprehended. Behind her, healers moved efficiently between pallets bearing the wounded. The night's battle had taken a heavy toll, though victory had ultimately belonged to Stormhold. When Blackwood's presence had vanished from the battlefield, Thornwood's forces had faltered, their coordinated assault dissolving into disorganized retreat. Many had been captured, others slain, and some had fled into the forest to uncertain fates. But victory had come at a price, the highest price. Lyra turned from the window, her gaze drawn inevitably to the largest pallet in the center of the chamber. There lay Magnus, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, his powerful body unnaturally still. He breathed but shallowly, his skin ashen, his temperature fluctuating between burning fever and deathly chill. The royal physicians had done all they could, which was precious little. Whatever afflicted their king went beyond physical wounds into the realm of spiritual and magical injury. When Blackwood had been banished, something had broken in the connection between Magnus and Lyra, a backlash of dark energy that had struck the king with devastating force. "Any change?" Lyra asked softly as Elder Thalia approached. The healer shook her head, her aged face grave with concern. "His body fights, but his spirit wanders. I cannot reach him through conventional methods." "And unconventional ones?" "That," Talia said, "is why we need you. The bond you formed with him during the battle. It still exists, though damaged. You may be the only one who can reach him where he has gone." Lyra's chest tightened with a mixture of fear and resolve. The bond connecting her to Magnus had been sudden and unexpected, formed in the heat of battle through desperate necessity. She had no training in how to use such a connection, no understanding of its limits or dangers. Yet she could not, would not, abandon him to whatever darkness now held him captive. "Tell me what to do," she said simply. Talia led her to Magnus's bedside. Up close, the damage was even more evident. Veins of darkness visible beneath his skin like rivers of shadow, pulsing with unnatural rhythm. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each one sounding harder won than the last. "Place your hands on his temples," Talia instructed. "Close your eyes. Find the bond between you. It will feel like a golden thread in the darkness of your mind. Follow it to wherever he has gone." "And when I find him?" The old healer's expression softened. "Remind him of who he is, of what he has to return to. The choice must ultimately be his." Lyra nodded, then carefully positioned herself beside Magnus. His skin burned beneath her touch, fever racing through his powerful frame. Closing her eyes, she reached for the meditative state Thalia had begun teaching her, letting her consciousness expand beyond physical limitations. At first, there was only darkness, the chaotic swirl of her own untrained mind struggling to focus. Then, gradually, she became aware of a faint golden light, pulsing weakly like a distant heartbeat. The bond connecting her to Magnus, damaged but not destroyed. Focusing on that tenuous thread, Lyra directed her consciousness along its length. The journey felt simultaneously instantaneous and eternal, a traversing of distance that existed only in the realm of spirit. When the disorientation passed, she found herself in a landscape of shadow and flame. A mindscape, Thalia had called it, the physical representation of Magnus's psyche, shaped by his experiences and beliefs. This particular mindscape spoke volumes about the man whose mind had created it. Mountains of obsidian rose against a sky of perpetual twilight, their peaks wreathed in clouds that occasionally flashed with silent lightning. Rivers of molten gold cut through valleys of black stone, their light providing the only real illumination in this stark realm. And at the center of it all stood a massive fortress, clearly Stormhold Castle, but transformed by Magnus's perception into something even more imposing. Its walls seemed impossibly high, its gates sealed with chains of dark energy that pulsed with the same rhythm as the shadow veins beneath his skin. Lyra knew with absolute certainty that Magnus was trapped within those walls, held captive in a prison of his own creation, or perhaps one Blackwood's final attack had helped shape. As she approached the fortress, movement caught her eye. Shadows detached from the obsidian mountains, flowing toward her with purpose. Not the same darkness that had been Blackwood, but something similar. Echoes of his magic, perhaps, or manifestations of Magnus's own inner demons. They surrounded her, these shadow wolves with eyes of smoldering ember, circling with predatory intent. Lyra stood her ground, drawing on her newly awakened heritage. Silver light bloomed around her hands as she called upon the power of her bloodline. "I am Lyra Elarin," she stated firmly. "Last daughter of the moon touched. I come to speak with your alpha." The largest of the shadow wolves approached, its form more substantial than the others. When it spoke, the voice emerged not from its mouth, but seemed to resonate from the very air around them. "He does not wish to be disturbed." The voice carried notes of both threat and weariness. "Leave this place, Moon-touched. It is not for you." "I will speak with him," Lyra insisted, allowing her power to flare brighter. "Or I will tear down these walls stone by stone until I find him." The shadow wolf's ember eyes narrowed. "You cannot. These defenses were built over a lifetime of pain and isolation. They cannot be breached by force. Not even yours." Lyra considered this, studying the imposing fortress with new understanding. If the walls represented Magnus's emotional barriers, then force indeed would prove useless. Those defenses had been constructed by necessity, layer upon layer of protection, built by a boy who had inherited a curse at 18 and a kingdom shortly thereafter. A man who had never been allowed to show weakness, pain, or uncertainty. "Then I won't use force," she decided. "I'll request entry, as is proper when visiting the territory of an alpha." The shadow wolf's posture shifted slightly, surprise perhaps, or reluctant respect. "He will not grant it." "Let him make that decision." Lyra stepped forward, silver light still dancing around her fingers, but no longer wielded as a weapon. "Tell him Lyra Elarin requests an audience. Tell him I've come to fulfill the second part of the prophecy." The shadow wolf held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and loped toward the fortress gates. The other shadows remained, watching her with unwavering attention, neither retreating nor advancing. Minutes passed, though time felt fluid and uncertain in this realm of mind and spirit. Finally, the gates shuddered and began to open, chains of dark energy unwinding just enough to allow passage. The shadow wolf returned. "He will see you. Follow me." Lyra proceeded through the gates, acutely aware of the oppressive energy emanating from the walls on either side. Unlike the real Stormhold, with its bustling courtyards and signs of everyday life, this version stood eerily empty. No guards patrolled the battlements, no servants hurried about their duties. Only shadows moved here, flowing across stone surfaces like liquid darkness. The shadow wolf led her deep into the fortress, through corridors that twisted in ways the real castle never would, until they reached a familiar door, the entrance to the king's private chambers. Here, the wolf stopped. "Beyond this point, you go alone." Its ember eyes fixed on her with something like warning. "Remember, Moon-touched. This is his domain, his rules, his pain." With those cryptic words, the shadow dissolved, leaving Lyra alone before the imposing door. After a moment's hesitation, she knocked firmly. No response came, but the door swung inward of its own accord. The chamber beyond bore only passing resemblance to Magnus's actual rooms. The dimensions were wrong, too vast, the ceiling lost in shadow. A fire burned in a hearth large enough to consume an oak tree, yet it gave off no warmth. And at the center of it all, seated in a throne-like chair, was Magnus, or rather, a version of Magnus. This figure appeared older, more worn, the lines of his face deeper, his hair streaked with premature gray. He wore armor rather than royal finery, battle-scarred plate that seemed to have been welded directly to his body. Most disturbing were the chains of shadow wrapped around his limbs and torso, anchoring him to the throne. "You shouldn't have come." His voice sounded like gravel, rough from disuse or pain or both. "This place is not for you." Lyra approached slowly, taking in the details of his confinement. The chains pulsed with the same dark energy she had seen beneath his skin in the physical world. "You're dying," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. A ghost of his sardonic smile touched his lips. "We're all dying," Moon touched. "Some of us just have a clearer timeline than others. This isn't you speaking, it's the remnant of Blackwood's curse." "Is it?" He shifted slightly, chains clinking with the movement. "Or is it simply truth I've never spoken aloud? The curse is breaking, yes, but the damage of 5 centuries cannot be undone in a single night. The pain has been part of me too long. It's written into my very bones." Lyra moved closer, until she stood directly before him. "So you choose to surrender? To let Blackwood win after all?" Anger flashed in his eyes, a glimpse of the alpha she knew. "I have fought every day since I was 18 years old. Fought the pain, fought my enemies, fought for my kingdom. I'm tired of fighting." "Then don't fight," Lyra said softly. "Let go." Confusion replaced anger. "What?" "The chains binding you. They're of your own making as much as Blackwood's. You've carried the weight of the curse for so long that you've forgotten how to exist without it. The pain became part of your identity, your strength, but you don't need it anymore." Magnus looked down at the shadow chains, as if truly seeing them for the first time. "Easy for you to say. You've had your heritage for all of one day. I've lived with this curse for 14 years. And now you have the chance to live without it." Lyra knelt before him, looking up into his weary face. "The prophecy speaks of 2 parts. Breaking the curse is only the beginning. Sun and moon must unite to break the chains of 5 centuries. Then shall dawn a golden age, if bonds of choice replace bonds of fate." "Bonds of choice," Magnus repeated, something shifting in his expression. "What does that mean?" "I think it means exactly what it says. The curse created a bond between us, the bond of fate, of prophecy. But for true healing to occur, for your kingdom to enter this promised golden age, we must choose each other freely." Lyra reached out, her hand hovering just above the shadow chains binding his right arm. "I choose to help you, Magnus, not because prophecy demands it, not because fate thrust us together, but because I see a man worth saving, a leader worth following, an alpha worth—" She hesitated, then finished softly, "worth everything." For a long moment, Magnus sat unmoving, his gaze fixed on her outstretched hand. Then, with visible effort, he lifted his arm against the restraint of the chains. "And if I choose to accept that help, to believe in this golden age?" "Then take my hand," Lyra answered simply. "Choose to live." Their fingers touched, and light exploded around them, not the silver glow of moon magic, nor the golden fire of an alpha's power, but something new. A radiance like the first light of dawn, rose and amber and pearl, washing away shadow wherever it touched. The chains binding Magnus to the throne began to disintegrate, crumbling to dust that blew away on a wind from nowhere. As each restraint fell, his appearance changed, the premature aging receding, the battle-scarred armor transforming back into the clothing he had worn during their confrontation with Blackwood. When the last chain dissolved, Magnus stood, unbound, unbowed, himself again. The mindscape around them shuddered, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as walls thinned and shadows retreated. "It's time to go back," Lyra said, still holding his hand. "Your kingdom needs its king. Magnus looked around at the transforming landscape of his own psyche, then back to her. And what of the moon-touched air? What does she need? The question hung between them, laden with meanings neither was ready to fully explore. Lyra answered with simple honesty. Time, understanding, and the freedom to discover who she truly is, now that she's no longer invisible. You were never invisible to me, Magnus said quietly. Even before I knew what you were, who you were, I saw you. Something warm unfurled in Lyra's chest at his words, but before she could respond, the mindscape began to dissolve around them, reality reasserting itself as Magnus's consciousness prepared to return to his physical form. Don't let go, she said quickly as the dissolution accelerated. Follow me back. The journey in reverse was less disorienting, but more urgent, the golden thread of their bond strengthening with each passing moment as they raced along its length. When Lyra opened her eyes, she found herself once more in the healing chamber, hands still pressed to Magnus's temples. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. His body remained still, the shadow veins dark beneath his skin. Then his chest expanded with a deep, shuddering breath, and his eyes snapped open, clear amber without a trace of shadow, fixing immediately on her face. You found me, he said, voice hoarse but strong. Relief coursed through her, so powerful it left her lightheaded. I will always find you, she replied, the words emerging without conscious thought, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. Around them, healers exclaimed in surprise and relief. Elder Thalia hurried forward, quickly assessing the king's condition with practiced hands and sharp eyes. The shadow veins had vanished, leaving only faint silver traces that already seemed to be fading. The curse is truly breaking, the old healer announced, wonder in her voice. It will take time to fully dissipate, but the worst has passed. Magnus sat up, moving cautiously, but with growing confidence as he tested his body's response. How long was I away? 3 days, Garrett answered from the doorway, his usually stoic expression softened by visible relief. 3 days while the kingdom held its breath, my king. And Thornwood? His forces? Scattered. Most captured, some fled. Thornwood himself escaped in the confusion, but without Blackwood's support, his power is greatly diminished. Garrett stepped closer. The council awaits word of your recovery. There are decisions to be made. Magnus nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken. A victory won, but at cost. Alliances shattered, political landscape altered, a kingdom in need of steady guidance through uncertain times. The work of a king never paused, not even for recovery from a mystical wound. I'll address them soon, he promised. First, I need a moment with Lady Alarin. And the formal title, the acknowledgement of her heritage rather than her previous status, caught Lyra by surprise. Garrett bowed slightly in her direction, then ushered the healers from the room, leaving Lyra alone with Magnus for the first time since their minds had touched in the shadow realm. For a moment, neither spoke. The connection between them hummed with unspoken awareness, both physical and something deeper, the bond that had saved his life, now permanently part of them both. You're still here, Magnus observed finally, a note of wonder in his voice. Did you expect me to vanish once you were healed? Lyra asked. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had. The life thrust upon you in the span of days, it's a heavy burden to bear. Many would have run from it. Lyra considered this, then shook her head. I spent 23 years running from who I am, though I didn't know it. I'm tired of running. She glanced toward the window, where morning light streamed in. Besides, I have nowhere else to go. Magnus followed her gaze, then looked back at her with unexpected intensity. You have a place here. Not as a servant, never again as a servant, but as Lyra Alarin, last daughter of the moon-touched. The prophecy speaks of bonds of choice creating a golden age. I would have you stay and help build that age if you're willing. The offer hung between them, generous, respectful, and yet somehow incomplete. Lyra sensed something held back, words unspoken. And what would my role be in this golden age? She asked carefully. Magnus held her gaze steadily. That would be your choice. Your heritage gives you status equal to any noble in the kingdom. You could claim lands, title, independence, or— He paused, something vulnerable briefly visible in his expression before the king's mask returned. Or you could remain here, at court, as my advisor in matters of the old ways, as my ally in rebuilding what Blackwood nearly destroyed. Lyra heard what he didn't say as clearly as what he did. The constraints of propriety of their respective positions prevented more direct speech. She was newly discovered nobility with powers barely understood. He was a king with responsibility to an entire realm. Whatever had sparked between them during battle, whatever connection had formed in the healing of his mind, could not be simply or quickly defined. "I'll stay," she said finally. "For now, at least. There's much I need to learn about my heritage, about these abilities I've barely begun to understand. And," she smiled slightly, "I find I'm no longer content to be invisible. I want to help make a difference, for others like me, for those without voice or power." Relief flickered across Magnus's features. "Then it's settled. You'll remain at Stormhold as an honored guest while you complete your training with Elder Thalia. The Council will formally acknowledge your bloodline and status. And when you're ready, we'll discuss what comes next." He extended his hand, a formal gesture to seal their agreement. Lyra took it without hesitation, the contact sending a now familiar warmth coursing through her veins. Not magic, or at least not entirely magic, but something equally powerful. Possibility, potential, promise. The council chamber buzzed with tense energy as lords and ladies of the realm assembled to hear their king's decree. 2 weeks had passed since the battle with Thornwood's forces and Blackwood's banishment. 2 weeks of furious diplomacy, military reorganization, and political maneuvering as the kingdom adjusted to dramatically altered circumstances. Lyra stood to the side, observing the proceedings with newfound confidence. Gone was the servant girl in rough homespun. In her place stood a young woman in a gown of midnight blue, trimmed with silver, her chestnut hair arranged in a simple but elegant style that exposed the crescent birthmark at the nape of her neck. She wore no jewelry except a single pendant, a small moonstone set in silver, a gift from Elder Thalia to mark the formal beginning of her training. The past fortnight had been a whirlwind of discovery and adjustment. Each day brought new revelations about her heritage, new abilities awakening as the last remnants of her mother's binding spell faded. She could now sense emotions with acute clarity, particularly strong feelings like fear, pain, or joy. She could call small amounts of moonlight to her fingertips even in daylight, though true power still required the night sky. Most remarkably, she had established rudimentary telepathic connections with several wolves in the royal pack, a skill Elder Thalia assured her would only grow stronger with practice. All this while navigating the treacherous waters of court politics as a newly revealed noblewoman of ancient lineage. Some embraced her readily, particularly the older families who remembered the legends of the moon-touched. Others viewed her with suspicion or outright hostility, none more so than Lady Vivian, who remained at court despite her father's disgrace and flight. Through it all, Magnus had been a steady presence, formal in public, warmer in the private council sessions, where Lyra's insights into the old ways proved increasingly valuable. The bond between them remained, a constant awareness humming beneath everyday interactions, but neither had spoken directly of what it might mean beyond its practical applications in matters of state. The council chamber doors opened, and Magnus entered. Conversation ceased instantly as the assembled nobility rose in respect. He took his place at the head of the massive oak table, Garrett standing at his right hand as always. "Be seated," Magnus instructed, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "We have much to discuss." The council settled, and Lyra noted the subtle dynamics at play. Who sat nearest the king? Who deferred to whom? Which factions had formed or strengthened in the aftermath of recent events? Court politics were still new to her, but her Omega's natural observational skills, honed by years of necessary invisibility, served her well in this new arena. "First," Magnus began, "the matter of Thornwood. Our scouts report he has fled to the southern territories, seeking asylum with Warlord Kane. This confirms our suspicions of a longer alliance between them than previously known." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Warlord Kane controlled the lawless border regions, a constant threat that had occupied Magnus's military attention for years. "We must prepare for the possibility of coordinated aggression from the south," Magnus continued. "Lord Commander Garrett will oversee the strengthening of our border defenses and the redeployment of our forces accordingly." "And what of the Thornwood lands and holdings?" asked Baron Rylant, a shrewd politician known for his opportunistic allegiances. "With Lord Thornwood declared traitor, his estates are forfeit to the crown." "Indeed." Magnus's gaze swept the table, noting the thinly veiled avarice in several expressions. "Those lands will be held in trust for now, administered directly by the crown until more permanent arrangements can be made." Disappointment flickered across several faces. Many had hoped to expand their own holdings through royal favor. Magnus moved on to other matters: trade agreements requiring renegotiation, diplomatic overtures from neighboring kingdoms curious about the sudden shift in power dynamics, domestic issues requiring royal attention. Through it all, Lyra observed the masterful way he balanced competing interests while never losing sight of the kingdom's overall welfare. Finally, Magnus addressed the matter many had been waiting for. Now, to the question of the royal succession. Tension thickened the air immediately. With the Thornwood alliance shattered and Magnus still unmarried at 32, the lack of an heir had become an urgent concern for the stability of the realm. "The events of recent weeks have demonstrated that our kingdom stands at a historical crossroads," Magnus stated. "The curse that has plagued the royal line for 5 centuries is breaking, a fact confirmed by our healers and seers. This presents both opportunity and obligation." He rose, commanding complete attention through presence alone. "In accordance with the ancient prophecy and in recognition of her pivotal role in recent events, I hereby formally acknowledge Lady Lyra Alarin as last daughter of the moon-touched bloodline, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities such heritage entails." Lyra stepped forward as they had rehearsed, standing tall despite the weight of dozens of evaluating stares. Magnus gestured for her to join him at the table. "Lady Alarin will henceforth serve as royal advisor on matters of the old ways and moon magic. Her counsel will be considered equal to any member of this council. Furthermore, she will establish an academy for the identification and training of those with lunar gifts, particularly among the Omega population previously overlooked for such abilities." This announcement provoked more vocal reactions, some approving, others clearly opposed to such elevation of an Omega, regardless of heritage. Lyra had expected nothing less. Centuries of prejudice would not dissolve overnight, even with royal decree. "Your Majesty," Lord Valerian spoke, his tone carefully modulated, "while we all appreciate Lady Alarin's contributions during our recent crisis, the matter of succession remains unaddressed. The kingdom requires stability, particularly in these uncertain times." The implication was clear. Acknowledgement of Lyra's status was acceptable, but any consideration of her as a potential royal consort would face significant opposition. The nobles wanted Magnus to marry a woman of their choosing, someone easily controlled, someone who wouldn't disrupt the comfortable power structure they had enjoyed for generations. "The succession is indeed paramount," Magnus agreed with deceptive mildness, "which is why I have decided to reinstate an ancient tradition, the moon ceremony." Shock rippled through the chamber. The moon ceremony was a ritual dating back to the kingdom's founding, when royal matches were determined not by political alliance, but by compatibility of spirit wolves and the blessing of the moon goddess herself. It had not been performed in at least 10 generations. "The ceremony will be held on the night of the summer solstice, 1 month hence," Magnus continued. "All eligible noblewomen of the realm may participate if they choose. The moon goddess will guide the selection of the future queen." Protests erupted immediately, lords speaking over one another in their haste to object. Magnus let the chaos continue briefly before raising his hand for silence. A request instantly obeyed. Such was the power of his alpha presence. "My decision is final," he stated, no room for argument in his tone. "We stand at the threshold of a new era for our kingdom. The old ways are returning, the ancient magic's awakening. It is fitting that we honor traditions that served our ancestors well." "And Lady Ellerin?" Lord Valerian asked, voicing what others clearly wondered. "Will she participate in this ceremony as well?" All eyes turned to Lyra, speculation and calculation evident in many gazes. Magnus looked to her, allowing her to answer for herself rather than speaking on her behalf, a courtesy that did not go unnoticed by the more observant council members. "I will be involved in the ceremony," Lyra answered carefully, "as is appropriate for one of moon-touched blood. The rituals require my participation to ensure proper connection with the lunar energies." A diplomatic non-answer that revealed nothing of her personal intentions while asserting her authority in matters of moon magic. Several nobles frowned at the ambiguity, but none challenged her directly. "The details will be arranged in the coming weeks," Magnus concluded. "For now, this council is dismissed. Lady Ellerin, Lord Commander Garrett, remain please." Dots. As the nobility filed out, Lyra caught fragments of hushed conversations, speculation about the ceremony, debates over which families would put forward candidates, assessments of how this unexpected development might be turned to advantage. Politics as usual, even in the face of momentous change. When the chamber had emptied except for the three of them, Magnus's formal demeanor relaxed slightly. "That went about as expected." "They're afraid," Lyra observed, "not just of change, but of losing influence. The moon ceremony removes control from their hands and places it with forces they neither understand nor trust." "Precisely why it's necessary," Magnus replied. "For too long, this kingdom has been governed by alliances of convenience and political expediency. The result has been corruption, stagnation, and vulnerability to influences like Blackwood's. Garrett, ever practical, focused on security concerns. We should expect resistance. Perhaps not open defiance, but certainly covert attempts to influence or undermine the ceremony. I'll increase the guard around Lady Ellerin. She'll be a particular target." Magnus nodded in agreement. "Assign your most trusted men. And Lyra, remain vigilant. Your training with Elder Thalia takes priority. The stronger your abilities, the safer you'll be." "And what of Lady Vivian?" Lyra asked. "She remains at court despite everything. Her presence feels provocative." "She has formally disavowed her father's actions and requested sanctuary," Magnus explained, though his expression suggested he shared Lyra's concerns. "Without evidence linking her directly to Blackwood's schemes, I cannot expel her without appearing vindictive and unjust." "She'll participate in the ceremony," Garrett predicted grimly. "Almost certainly," Magnus agreed. "Which is why the ritual must be flawless, the lunar magic beyond tampering. That responsibility falls to you, Lyra. Can you ensure the integrity of the ceremony?" The weight of his trust settled on her shoulders, not unwelcome, but sobering. A month ago, she had been scrubbing floors. Now she was tasked with safeguarding a sacred ritual that would determine the kingdom's future queen. "I will," she promised. "Elder Thalia has ancient texts describing the ceremony in detail. Together, we'll ensure it proceeds exactly as it should." What remained unspoken hung in the air between them. The question of whether Lyra herself would stand as a candidate, whether the bond they already shared might influence the outcome. Neither raised the subject directly, the timing not yet right for such discussion. "Good." Magnus straightened, the brief moment of informality passing as he resumed the mantle of kingship. "There's much to prepare. We'll speak again tomorrow." As Lyra departed the council chamber, her mind swirled with all that lay ahead. The moon ceremony would be a pivotal moment, not just for Magnus and the kingdom, but for her personally. Whatever happened, there would be no returning to invisibility afterward. The path before her led only forward, into a future bright with possibility, but shadowed by lingering threats. She had made her choice to stay, to embrace her heritage and the responsibilities it entailed. Now she would see that choice through to whatever end awaited. The days leading to the summer solstice passed in a whirlwind of preparation and increasingly intense training. Under Elder Thalia's guidance, Lyra's abilities grew rapidly, her connection to lunar energy strengthening, her control over her newfound powers becoming more precise. Most remarkable was her first full transformation. On the night of the full moon preceding the solstice, Thalia had led her deep into the royal forest, to a clearing where moonlight poured unfiltered through the canopy. There, with Magnus and Garrett as witnesses for safety, Lyra had finally called forth her wolf form. The experience had been beyond description. Pain and ecstasy intertwined as her body reconfigured itself, bones shifting, muscles stretching, skin yielding to fur white as new-fallen snow, with silver markings like lunar phases across her shoulders and flanks. When the transformation completed, she had stood on 4 paws for the first time, senses exploding with new awareness, scents, sounds, sensations previously inaccessible to her human form. Magnus had transformed as well, his massive black wolf with the distinctive silver streak standing beside her smaller, more lithe form. Together, they had run beneath the moon, communication flowing between them without words, their bond strengthening through shared joy in the simple freedom of wolf form. That night had changed something between them, breaking down barriers that formality and circumstance had maintained. No declarations had been made, no commitments spoken, but understanding had deepened. Whatever the moon ceremony might reveal, they were bound already by something rare and precious. Now, on the eve of the solstice, Lyra stood in her chambers preparing for the ritual ahead. The room, once the quarters of a favored royal advisor, had been hers since the night of Blackwood's defeat. Spacious and elegant without ostentation, it reflected her own emerging style, functionality balanced with simple beauty, dominated by silver and midnight blue, with touches of warmth in amber accents. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, she found Oliver, no longer in kitchen attire, but dressed in the formal gray of the Wolf Guard, the ancient order Lyra had learned had never truly disbanded but gone underground, maintaining their vigil through generations. "It's time, my lady," he said, the gruff affection in his voice unchanged despite the elevation of her status. "The candidates are assembling in the great hall." Lyra nodded, smoothing the folds of her ceremonial robe, silver silk embroidered with the phases of the moon in thread that seemed to glow with its own inner light. "Have there been any incidents?" Oliver's expression darkened slightly. "Nothing direct, but Lady Vivian has been uncommonly agreeable these past days. It makes my old soldier's instincts itch. Mine as well." Lyra had learned to trust her intuition, particularly since her Omega senses had been enhanced by the awakening of her lunar gifts. "Keep watch on her tonight. Whatever she plans, it will come during the ceremony itself, when all attention is focused on the ritual." "Already arranged. She'll not move without eyes upon her." Oliver offered his arm with unexpected formality. "Shall we, Lady Alarin? Your ancestors await your service." Lyra accepted the gesture, touched by the old warrior's acknowledgement of her heritage. Together they proceeded through corridors now familiar to her, toward the great hall where the first phase of the ceremony would begin. The hall had been transformed for the occasion. All tables had been removed, replaced by a circular arrangement of standing stones transported from an ancient sacred site in the mountains. Moonstone and silver inlays created patterns across the floor, a massive lunar calendar marking the progression of cycles and seasons. Candles numbered in the hundreds cast golden light that complemented rather than competed with the silver radiance, beginning to stream through high windows as twilight deepened toward night. Around the perimeter stood the noble families of the realm, dressed in their finest. Nearer the center, 13 young women waited in white robes, the candidates who had chosen to participate in the ceremony. Lyra noted Lady Vivian among them, her golden beauty somehow colder and more calculated than before. Their gazes met briefly across the distance, Vivian's blue eyes narrowing with barely concealed hostility before her perfect courtier's mask returned. At the far end of the hall, Magnus waited upon the royal dais, transformed for tonight into a representation of the sun to complement the moon symbolism throughout the rest of the chamber. He wore formal attire of deep burgundy and gold, his crown polished to gleaming brilliance. Despite the regal appearance, Lyra could sense his tension through their bond. Not fear exactly, but intense awareness of all that hinged on the night's events. Elder Thalia approached as Lyra took her place beside the largest moonstone at the center of the circle. The old healer carried a silver bowl filled with water collected from a sacred spring beneath the light of 13 consecutive full moons. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Lyra nodded. "As ready as I can be. Remember, once the ritual begins, you must maintain focus, regardless of what occurs. The lunar energies can be volatile if not properly channeled. Trust your instincts and your training." With these final words of guidance, Thalia moved to her own position. As keeper of the old knowledge, she would direct the ceremony, while Lyra provided the connection to lunar power necessary for its completion. A hush fell over the assembly as the last rays of the setting sun faded from the high windows. From somewhere deep within the castle, a bell tolled 13 times, the sacred number of the full lunar cycle. When the final tone faded, Lyra raised her hands, summoning moonlight to her fingertips with practiced ease. "We gather beneath the summer solstice moon," she began, her voice carrying with surprising strength, "to honor an ancient tradition. On this night, when sun and moon find perfect balance, we seek guidance in matters of heart and kingdom. Let those who come seeking be judged not by bloodline or wealth or beauty alone, but by the resonance of their spirits with the lunar energies that flow through all living things." The 13 candidates stepped forward into the circle of standing stones, arranging themselves at points marked with their family crests. Each carried a small silver chalice, empty and waiting. Elder Thalia moved around the circle, pouring a measure of the sacred spring water into each chalice. "Drink," she instructed when all had been served. "Let the water blessed by 13 moons open your spirits to the judgment of the goddess." The candidates obeyed, some with visible nervousness, others with calm certainty. Vivian, Lyra noticed, hesitated fractionally before drinking, her eyes scanning the ritual as if seeking flaws or opportunities. As the last candidate lowered her chalice, Lyra began the invocation that would initiate the central ritual. Ancient words in a language few remembered flowed from her lips, as if she had spoken them 1,000 times before, the knowledge of her ancestors awakening through her blood. Moonlight streamed through the high windows now, directly illuminating the central moonstone where Lyra stood. At her words, the light seemed to bend, flowing around the hall in patterns that defied natural explanation, touching each standing stone in succession until the entire circle glowed with silver radiance. The candidates gasped in unison as the moonlight reached them, each woman's form becoming outlined in silvery illumination of varying intensity. This was the first test, measuring each candidate's natural resonance with lunar energy, their capacity for connection to the old magic that sustained the kingdom. Most glowed with modest radiance, marking them as suitable if not exceptional matches. 2 shone brighter, their connection to lunar energy stronger through some quirk of bloodline or spirit. Vivian, interestingly, showed less illumination than many despite her high birth, a fact that clearly displeased her from the tightening of her perfect features. Now came the crucial phase. Lyra gestured to Magnus, who descended from the dais to stand opposite her across the central moonstone. As king and alpha, his presence completed the circle, creating perfect balance between solar and lunar energies, between masculine and feminine, strength and wisdom, action and contemplation. "As the moon reflects the sun's light," Lyra intoned, "so must queen complement king, not through submission, but through balance, not through sameness, but through harmony of differences." Magnus extended his hands over the moonstone, palms down. Golden light, the manifestation of alpha power at its purest, flowed from his fingers to meet the silver radiance Lyra channeled upward. Where the energies met, they spiraled together, creating a column of light that rose to the vaulted ceiling before spreading outward toward the waiting candidates. This was the moment of truth, when the combined energy would seek resonance with the woman most compatible with both Magnus's spirit and the kingdom's needs. According to the ancient texts, the light would coalesce around the chosen one, marking her unequivocally as the future queen. As the spiraling energies expanded, Lyra maintained her focus despite the strain of channeling such power. Through their bond, she could feel Magnus doing the same, his considerable strength supporting her as the ritual reached its climax. The light touched each candidate in turn, assessing, measuring, judging by criteria beyond mortal understanding. Several women were quickly passed over, the energy barely pausing before moving on. Others received more thorough examination, the light lingering longer before continuing its search. When it reached Vivian, something unexpected happened. Instead of either passing over or embracing her, the light seemed to hesitate, fluctuating wildly. Vivian's expression shifted from confidence to confusion, then to something like panic. With sudden, horrifying clarity, Lyra realized what was happening. Vivian wore some talisman or carried some charm designed to manipulate the ceremony, likely provided by her father or even created from remnants of Blackwood's power. The conflicting energies were creating a dangerous instability in the ritual. Through their bond, Lyra sensed Magnus's awareness of the problem at the same moment. His eyes met hers across the moonstone, silent communication flowing between them. With minute adjustment of his hands, he directed more of his alpha power into the combined energy, steadying it as Lyra simultaneously purified the lunar component. Together, they wrested control back from whatever dark influence sought to corrupt the ceremony. The light stabilized, then moved decisively away from Vivian, who stood pale with thwarted rage as her manipulation failed. The energy continued its circuit, assessing the remaining candidates with renewed purpose. Then, in a moment that seemed both inevitable and shocking, it reversed course entirely. Instead of selecting any of the candidates, the spiraling gold and silver light returned to the central moonstone and began to coalesce around Lyra herself. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the watching nobility as the ritual defied expectations. The light engulfed Lyra completely, lifting her several inches from the floor as power coursed through her being. It wasn't painful, quite the opposite. The sensation was one of rightness, of completion, as if pieces long separated had finally rejoined. Across from her, Magnus stood unwavering, his golden power flowing continuously into the manifestation. His expression revealed nothing to the observers, but through their bond, Lyra sensed a complex mixture of emotions, surprise, certainly, but also a deep satisfaction and something warmer, more personal. When the light finally set, Lyra gently back upon the stone floor. The message was unmistakable. The moon ceremony had chosen, not from among the noble candidates, but the moon-touched heir herself. The last daughter of the Ilaran line, the Omega once deemed worthless and invisible, had been designated as the kingdom's future queen. Elder Thalia, recovering from her own surprise, spoke the ritual words that would complete the ceremony. The goddess has chosen, the balance is found, sun and moon, alpha and omega, king and queen to be. She turned to the assembled nobility, her aged voice carrying surprising authority. Behold the choice of powers beyond mortal manipulation. Behold your future queen. For a moment, silence reigned in the great hall as the implications settled over the gathering. Then, from the back of the assembly, a voice shouted, "No!" Vivian pushed forward, her perfect composure shattered by rage and thwarted ambition. "This is sacrilege. The ritual was corrupted, not by me, but by her." She pointed accusingly at Lyra. "She manipulated the outcome to secure power for herself. This servant, this nobody, has bewitched our king and now seeks to steal our throne." Several nobles murmured in agreement, predisposed to doubt the elevation of an Omega, regardless of heritage or divine selection. Others looked uncertain, caught between ancient beliefs and modern prejudices. Before anyone could respond to Vivian's accusations, a new commotion erupted at the hall's entrance. Guards burst through the doors, weapons drawn, pursuing a figure that moved with unnatural speed, a blur of darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Blackwood!" someone screamed, and panic bloomed throughout the assembly. But Lyra, still connected to the lunar energies of the ceremony, perceived the truth. Not Blackwood himself, he had indeed been banished, his essence scattered, but something created from his remains. A shadow construct, a final trap left behind to activate should his primary plans fail. The shadow creature darted through the crowd, causing chaos but harming no one as it made directly for the ritual circle. Its purpose became horrifyingly clear as it lunged toward Magnus, claws of darkness extending from an amorphous form. Without hesitation, Lyra channeled the immense power still flowing through her. Silver light blazed from her hands as she interposed herself between Magnus and the shadow creature. The collision of energies created a concussive blast that staggered everyone nearby. But Lyra held her ground, forcing the creature back through sheer willpower and lunar might. "It seeks to complete what Blackwood began," she called to Magnus, "to destroy the royal line before the curse can fully break." Understanding instantly, Magnus added his own power to hers. Golden alpha energy merged with silver lunar light, creating a barrier that contained the writhing shadow. Together they closed the circle of energy, compressing the darkness until it could no longer maintain cohesion. With a sound like glass shattering, the shadow construct imploded, collapsing into nothingness as the last remnant of Blackwood's malevolence was finally extinguished. In the stunned silence that followed, Lyra and Magnus stood side by side, still radiating the combined power of their heritage. The nobility who had witnessed the event remained frozen in place, many openly gaping at the display of magic most had believed long vanished from the world. Vivian, seeing her final hope of disruption eliminated, attempted to slip away in the confusion. She made it halfway to the exit before Garrett's guards intercepted her, Oliver among them. "Lady Vivian Thornwood," Garrett announced formally, "you are detained on suspicion of conspiracy against the crown and attempted magical assault. The talisman you wear, provided by your father and created from Blackwood's essence, is evidence enough of your guilt." As the guards escorted a furiously struggling Vivian from the hall, Magnus turned to address the still shocked assembly. "The goddess has chosen," he stated, his voice carrying the full weight of alpha command, "and in doing so has saved this kingdom yet again from those who would destroy it for their own ambition." He took Lyra's hand in a gesture both personal and symbolic. "The prophecy speaks truth. Sun and moon must unite to break the chains of 5 centuries. Then shall dawn a golden age if bonds of choice replace bonds of fate." He turned to Lyra, his expression softening. "The bond of fate brought us together, curse and prophecy, ancient hatred and older hope. But I choose you freely, Lyra Eleran, not because destiny demands it, but because you are worthy beyond any measure of nobility or birth." Before the entire court, he knelt, still holding her hand. "Will you choose me in return? Not the king, not the alpha, but the man who stands before you with an open heart?" The gesture, an alpha king kneeling before an omega, sent shockwaves through the assembly. Such a thing violated every convention of their hierarchical society. Yet in that moment, centuries of tradition gave way to something older and truer. The recognition that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the courage to be vulnerable when it matters most. Lyra looked down at the man kneeling before her, the king who had seen her when she was invisible, the alpha who respected her strength rather than feared it, the person whose pain she had shared and whose mind she had healed. The choice was simple, inevitable, and entirely her own. "I choose you," she said, her voice clear enough for all to hear. "Not the crown, not the kingdom, but the man who stands before me with an open heart." As Magnus rose to his feet, the remaining energies of the moon ceremony coalesced around them one final time. Gold and silver light spiraled upward, weaving together until they became inseparable, a new radiance that was neither one nor the other, but something greater than both. Where it touched the ancient stones, new growth appeared, tiny moonflowers blooming out of season, their petals catching and reflecting the combined light. Elder Thalia, tears streaming unashamedly down her weathered cheeks, spoke the words that would forever change the kingdom. "The prophecy is fulfilled," The curse is broken. The Golden Age begins. 1 month later, beneath the light of the full moon, Lyra stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, her chambers now, shared with the man who would formally become her husband at the autumn equinox. Below stretched the capital city, lights twinkling like earthbound stars as citizens continued celebrations that had barely paused since the announcement of their king's betrothal. The weeks following the moon ceremony had been a whirlwind of activity. Vivian and the nobles most closely aligned with Thornwood had been tried and exiled, their lands redistributed to more loyal vassals. Diplomatic envoys had been dispatched to neighboring kingdoms, announcing both the engagement and the kingdom's renewed commitment to the old ways, to balance between strength and wisdom, between progress and tradition. Most significantly, Lyra had established the foundation of what would become the Lunar Academy, a school dedicated to identifying and training those with gifts long suppressed or denied. Already 12 students had been identified, all Omegas previously considered wolfless. Like Lyra herself, they carried dormant abilities that only needed proper guidance to flourish. "Deep thoughts?" Magnus asked, joining her at the balcony. The curse continued to fade gradually, as Talia had predicted. He still experienced occasional pain, but nothing like the constant agony that had been his companion for 14 years. "Grateful ones," Lyra replied, leaning into his warmth. "A month ago, I was scrubbing floors and hiding from notice. Now," she gestured to the city below, to the kingdom stretching beyond. "Now we're planning to change the world." Magnus smiled, the expression coming more naturally to him with each passing day. "We already have. The old barriers are falling, between Alpha and Omega, between noble and common. It won't be easy or quick, but the path is clear." "And what of Blackwood?" Lyra asked the question that occasionally troubled her dreams. "Is he truly gone?" "His power is broken, his essence scattered beyond recovery," Magnus assured her. "Whatever remnants might linger in dark places can no longer threaten us. Not while sun and moon stand together." He brushed his fingers over the crescent birthmark at the nape of her neck. "Not while the last daughter of the Alaran line has finally come home." Home. The word resonated through Lyra's being with perfect truth. Home was not a place, but a belonging, a purpose, a love freely chosen rather than dictated by fate. She had found all three, emerging from invisibility into a light of her own making. As moonlight bathed them in silver radiance, Lyra turned in Magnus's embrace. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, after you claimed me under your protection in the Great Hall?" "I said many things," he replied, his amber eyes warm with memory. "Which words in particular?" "You said I was never invisible to you." She traced the strong line of his jaw, marveling at the freedom to touch him so intimately. "Even then, when you didn't know who I truly was, you saw me." "I did." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Just as you saw me. Not the king, not the alpha, but the man beneath the pain and duty. We recognized each other long before we understood why." Lyra smiled, contentment flowing through her like moonlight given form. "Sun and moon," she murmured. "Different lights, different strengths, but part of the same sky." "Always," Magnus agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as gentle as moonrise and as inevitable as dawn. Below them, the kingdom prepared for a new era, one built not on domination and hierarchy, but on balance and recognition of worth in all its forms. The path ahead would hold challenges, certainly, but also promise beyond imagining. A golden age born from the union of opposites, from wounds healed and barriers broken, from invisible strength finally recognized and honored. The servant girl had vanished, leaving in her place a queen who would never forget what it meant to be unseen. And in that knowledge lay the seeds of transformation, for herself, for her Alpha King, and for the kingdom they would build together.